My name is Aaliyah. I am 28 years old and a senior forensic financial auditor. I track missing money for a living. Nothing slips past me. But the greatest fraud I ever uncovered was happening right inside my own family. It started with a cryptic blank email from my grandfather Isaiah and ended with me hiding behind heavy velvet curtains in his study, holding my breath while my mother shoved a fake legal document in his face. Those were the only words my grandfather whispered before the front doors of his $12 million estate burst open. I did not even have time to ask questions. I just pulled out my phone and hit record. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your peace from toxic family members. My grandfather built Baptiste Logistics from a single delivery truck into a $400 million supply chain empire. He was the definition of black excellence, a self-made king who bought his sprawling mansion in Baldwin Hills, Los Angeles, so his family would never have to struggle. I was always his favorite, the only one who inherited his mind for numbers and his refusal to back down. That is exactly why my mother Valerie hated me. 5 years ago, she engineered a smear campaign so vicious it got me banished from the family. I had to build my auditing career from scratch, completely cut off from the wealth. I had not spoken to them in half a decade. So when I received an empty email from my grandfather's private server at 6 in the morning, my instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. I drove straight to Baldwin Hills. The Los Angeles morning was uncharacteristically gloomy, a thick gray fog hanging over the palm trees lining the massive driveway. I bypassed the main gate using the emergency code only my grandfather and I knew. I parked my car behind the guest house where it could not be seen from the street. The silence of the property felt unnatural. There were no groundskeepers, no private security, no staff. Just an eerie stillness wrapping around the massive stone facade of the mansion. I walked briskly up the marble steps to the front entrance. Before my knuckles could even brush the heavy oak door, it swung inward. My grandfather stood there. He did not look like the commanding executive who terrified boardroom rivals. He looked frantic. His eyes were wide with a calculated urgency that sent a chill straight down my spine. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength and yanked me inside the grand foyer. "Get inside. Quick! Hide behind the study curtains right now." He shoved me toward the hallway leading to his private office. I wanted to ask a dozen questions. Why was the house empty? Why was he acting like we were under attack? But the sound of tires screeching onto the gravel driveway outside stopped me cold. Someone was coming. Someone angry and in a massive hurry. I ran into the study. The room smelled of old paper, expensive leather, and Cuban cigars. I slipped behind the floor-to-ceiling burgundy velvet curtains framing the bay windows. The fabric was thick enough to conceal me completely, while still allowing me a narrow slit to see the mahogany desk and the double doors. I pulled out my phone, switched it to silent, and pressed the record button. Seconds later, the front doors of the mansion burst open with a violent crash. The sharp, aggressive clicking of designer heels echoed on the marble floors, accompanied by the heavy thud of expensive leather boots. I recognized the loud voices immediately. My mother Valerie stormed into the study first. She wore a pristine white designer suit, her hair styled perfectly, looking every inch the flawless society matriarch. But her face was twisted with an ugly, greedy rage. Right behind her strutted my younger sister Brianna, the family golden child. Brianna was busy checking her reflection in the glass of her phone, completely unbothered by the gravity of whatever they were doing. And trailing them both was Brad Jenkins, Brianna's white husband. Brad came from an old money family that had secretly gone bankrupt years ago. He was an arrogant parasite who married my sister solely to siphon the family fortune, playing the role of a refined financial savior, while secretly draining every account he could touch. Brad walked straight to my grandfather's antique mahogany desk and threw a thick stack of legal documents onto the polished wood. He did not even have the respect to wait for my grandfather to sit down. "Sign the papers, Isaiah." Brad demanded, his tone dripping with disrespect and entitlement. "The board is waiting." You are holding up the transition, and frankly, I am tired of indulging your stubbornness. We have a press conference at noon to announce me as the new head of the company. My grandfather stood near the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. He played the part of a frail, confused old man perfectly. "What are these papers, Valerie?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Why are you bringing this boy into my private study?" Valerie marched up to him, pointing a manicured finger directly at his face. "Do not play the victim with me, old man," she snapped. "Those papers are the immediate power of attorney and the full transfer of your controlling shares. You are 76 years old. You are losing your mind. It is time for you to step down before you ruin everything my family deserves." I gripped my phone tighter in the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. This was not just a simple disagreement over business operations. This was a ruthless corporate coup orchestrated by the people who were supposed to protect him. Brad threw a second folder next to the transfer papers. I zoomed my phone camera from behind the velvet curtain, capturing bold red letters on the top file. They were medical evaluations, psychiatric assessments from a private clinic. Brad leaned against the desk, reaching into his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick cigar and a silver lighter. He struck the flint, the sharp click echoing in the tense silence, and took an arrogant drag. Heavy smoke began filling the room, drifting toward my hiding spot. "Understand your position right now, Isaiah," Brad said, blowing smoke directly toward my grandfather. "You built a nice little operation here, a cute little ghetto trucking company. It is commendable, really, a bootstrapping success story that looks great in local magazines. But Baptiste Logistics has outgrown you. You are playing in the major leagues now, and you lack the pedigree or white-collar refinement to keep this empire afloat. It needs a Jenkins." I felt my blood boil. The audacity of this man standing in a $12 million estate paid for by my grandfather's sweat, calling a $400 million supply chain a ghetto trucking company. Brad was a broke trust fund baby whose family squandered their wealth decades ago. He was using my sister as a human ATM, and now he was trying to steal the bank. My grandfather kept his head lowered, gripping his cane. He played the part of the defeated elder flawlessly. "My company is doing fine, Brad," my grandfather said, his voice carrying a waver. "We secured federal contracts. We do not need your family name to survive." My mother scoffed, stepping forward to flank Brad. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. "Do not be delusional, Dad," she snapped, crossing her arms over her white suit. "You are a dinosaur. The corporate world does not respect you anymore. They see an old man who refuses to modernize. Brad has the connections we need. He has the social standing. You are going to sign those medical documents admitting your cognitive decline, and you are going to transfer the voting rights today." "What if I refuse?" my grandfather asked, looking up with tired eyes. "What if I call my lawyers right now?" "You do not have lawyers anymore," Brianna chimed in, scrolling. "Brad fired the old legal team yesterday. We brought in our own counsel. If you do not sign, we will take those psychiatric evaluations straight to a judge. We will have you declared legally incompetent by Friday. You will be locked in an assisted living facility so fast your head spins. Trust me, Grandpa, those places do not let you keep fancy cigars or your corner office." My mother stepped closer to my grandfather, her face twisting into a mask of pure resentment. "You should be thanking us," she hissed. "We are saving this family from your incompetence. You were going to leave the company to Aaliyah, were you not? You were going to hand over my inheritance, my birthright, to that arrogant, disrespectful little brat." I held my breath behind the curtain, keeping the camera steady. My grandfather looked at her, his expression hardening. "Aaliyah is twice the businesswoman you will ever be. She understood the numbers. She understood the legacy." My mother let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Aaliyah is a criminal," she screamed, losing her society facade. "She is a thief. Did you forget why she is not here to save you today? Did you forget why I kicked her out 5 years ago?" My grandfather stood his ground. "I never believed she stole that money from the trust fund. I knew something was wrong. You never let me investigate it. You banished her before I could hire an auditor, because there was nothing to investigate." My mother spat back, stepping close to him. "I made sure of it. I fabricated those bank transfers myself. I moved the money into Aaliyah's personal accounts, and I paid our old accountant $10,000 to falsify the audit trail. It was the easiest thing I ever did. She was getting too close to the truth, Dad. She sniffed around the corporate accounts, asking too many questions about the missing operating funds. I had to get rid of her. I framed her for embezzlement, and you fell for it like everyone else. I protected my legacy by throwing that forensic auditor out on the street with nothing. My heart stopped. My hands gripped my phone tightly. For 5 years, I carried the shame of being disowned. For 5 years, I rebuilt my life from zero working night shifts to pay for my auditing certification. I lost my family, my home, and my reputation because my mother decided I was a threat to her greed. Hearing her confess, hearing the lack of remorse in her voice, shattered whatever tiny fraction of daughterly love I had left. The final nail in the coffin was Brianna's reaction. My sister finally looked up from her phone and smiled. "It worked perfectly, Mom," Brianna said, examining her manicured nails. "Aaliyah is probably working a drive-through. She was always too smart for her own good. It is much better this way. Now Brad can run the company, and we can finally start living the lifestyle we deserve without that annoying auditor breathing down our necks." Brad smirked, taking another long drag of his cigar. He blew smoke right into my grandfather's face. "You see, Isaiah," he said smoothly, "it is over. Your own daughter outplayed you years ago. You have no allies left. Your golden grandchild is in exile. Your current staff works for me. Your bank accounts are frozen. The judge reviewing your conservatorship is a close personal friend of my father. You have absolutely no moves left on the board. Sign the papers, or we will call the private medical transport waiting outside and have you strapped to a gurney right now. I am not asking you again." Brianna let out a high-pitched giggle. She tossed her long hair and leaned against Brad. "Honestly, we are doing Aaliyah a favor, keeping her far away from real money," Brianna sneered. "That broke auditor is probably still living in a shoebox, crying over being disowned. She never had the elegance to handle the Baptiste fortune. I bet she is clipping coupons trying to pay off student loans. We are the face of this family now. It is time we start acting like it." Valerie smiled. "Exactly. The dead weight is cut loose. Pick up the pen, Isaiah." I hit stop on my own phone and saved the file to my encrypted cloud server. The trap was set. They had handed me a recorded confession of financial fraud. I pushed the heavy velvet curtain aside and stepped out. The sudden movement cast a long shadow across the antique Persian rug. "I think the only dead weight here is the counterfeit Rolex ticking on your husband's wrist, Brianna," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a diamond blade. The reaction to that was explosive. My mother gasped, stumbling backward until her heels hit the leather sofa. The blood drained from her contoured face, leaving her hollow and terrified. Brianna dropped her phone, the device clattering against the hardwood floor, her mouth open in disbelief. Brad froze his cigar halfway to his lips, his smirk melting into profound shock. My grandfather stood by the door, an unreadable glimmer in his eyes, telling me he was ready for this war. "Aaliyah," my mother choked out, her voice a whisper. "How did you get in here?" I ignored her, keeping my gaze locked on my younger sister. I took slow, deliberate steps toward the center of the room, my heels clicking with the authority they had tried to project moments ago. I looked Brianna up and down, a cold smile touching my lips. "You always loved putting on a show, Brianna," I said smoothly. "But if you are going to pretend to be the wealthy heiress of the Baptiste Empire, you should authenticate your wardrobe. That dress is from last season, and judging by the uneven stitching on the hem, it is a mid-tier replica you bought online. Do not get me started on that designer bag. Real hardware does not tarnish after 3 months in Los Angeles humidity. You are playing dress-up with Daddy's money, but since Mom cut off your allowance, you are scrambling to keep up appearances." Brianna's face turned crimson. She crossed her arms defensively, her voice screeching. "Shut up! You do not know anything about my life. You are a broke outcast who snuck in here to beg for cash." I let out a soft laugh. "Beg for cash." "Brianna, I am a senior forensic financial auditor. I track international wire fraud for breakfast. I do not need to beg for pennies when I can see every single cent this family spends. Let us talk about your old money husband. I turned to Brad, who was visibly sweating. He tried to puff his chest out to reclaim his intimidating posture, but his eyes darted nervously toward the door. Brad Jenkins, I said, with deliberate disgust. The supposed savior of our ghetto trucking company. Your family has not had real money since the early 2000s. Your father mortgaged the last of the Jenkins estate to pay off gambling debts, leaving you with nothing but a recognizable last name and an empty trust fund. That is a lie, Brad barked, stepping toward me. His face was flushed with anger. You are a delusional, bitter woman making up stories. I held up my phone, tapping the screen. Oh, I am making stories up. Then please explain why the luxury watch on your wrist has a ticking second hand instead of a sweeping one. Genuine luxury watches sweep, Brad. Everyone in high society knows that. You bought that cheap knockoff 3 weeks ago using a high-interest credit card currently maxed out at $45,000. You married my sister because you are drowning in debt and needed a naive girl to fund your lifestyle. You are not a savior. You are a highly functioning parasite. The room descended into chaos. Brianna spun around to face Brad, her voice hysterical. Is that true? Are you broke? Did you buy a fake watch? Brad grabbed Brianna's arm. His composure shattered. Shut up, Brianna. Do not listen to this witch. She is trying to turn us against each other. My mother found her voice stepping between me and my grandfather. Security. She screamed, her perfect posture abandoned. I want security in here right now. This woman is trespassing. She is mentally unstable and extremely dangerous. I stood perfectly still, watching the panic set in. You can call whoever you want, Mother, I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. But before you have me thrown out, consider the fact that my encrypted server just received a clear audio recording of you confessing to falsifying corporate audit trails, framing your daughter for embezzlement, and attempting to illegally seize control of a $400 million company. If I walk out that door, that recording goes straight to the district attorney. Valerie froze, her hand hovering over her chest. The threat of public humiliation and federal prison paralyzed her. She looked at Brad, hoping he had a solution, but the arrogant white-collar savior was too busy trying to defend his fake watch to his screaming wife. The power dynamic shifted entirely. They thought they had backed an old man into a corner. They thought they had erased me from the narrative completely. But they forgot one crucial detail about forensic auditors. We always follow the paper trail, and we never make an accusation we cannot prove. I looked at my grandfather, who gave me a subtle nod of approval. The real war for Baptiste Logistics had just begun, and I held all the ammunition to finish it. Brad's face twisted from embarrassment back to desperate fury. He realized he could not outsmart a forensic auditor with words. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out his phone, and tapped a single button. Seconds later, the heavy oak doors swung open. 2 massive men in black suits stepped into the room. I noticed the unfamiliar insignias on their tactical vests. These were private contractors, hired mercenaries brought in to secure the hostile takeover. Brad smirked, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. You talk entirely too much, Aaliyah, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I fired the old guards this morning. You are trespassing on private property, and I want you removed immediately. The 2 guards advanced without hesitation. Before I could sidestep, heavy hands clamped down on my shoulders, gripping my jacket with brutal force. I struggled, digging my heels into the Persian rug, but their grip was like iron. My mother stepped forward, her terror replaced by a sickening, triumphant smile. She reached into her white leather handbag and pulled out a thick document bound in a blue folder. The golden seal of the Los Angeles County Superior Court gleamed. You think a little audio recording will save you? Valerie mocked, waving the document in my face. You have been out of the game for too long, sweetie. I am not asking your grandfather for permission today. I am giving him the courtesy of stepping down voluntarily. She flipped the folder open, revealing a signature at the bottom. This is a court-ordered emergency conservatorship, Valerie announced, her eyes wide with manic victory. Signed and finalized by Judge Harrison at 8 in the morning. Your grandfather is already legally declared mentally incapacitated. He has zero legal standing to challenge us, zero authority over the company, and zero rights to his bank accounts. Any testimony he gives about fraud will be dismissed as the ramblings of a senile old man. You are just a disgruntled daughter trying to extort her family. The judge happens to be a close personal friend of the Jenkins family, and he was happy to expedite the paperwork for a generous campaign contribution. The reality of her trap set in. They had bypassed the boardroom and corrupted the legal system to cage him. My grandfather met my eyes from across the room. He gave a fractional, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He was telling me to stand down to let them have this temporary victory so we could win the actual war. Brad stepped right into my personal space. At the end of the day, you are just a loud black woman with a useless accounting degree who does not know her place, Brad whispered viciously, leaning so close I could feel his breath. This estate belongs to me now. The company belongs to me. You are nothing but a trespasser. Get this trash out of my house. The guards shoved me forward, forcing me out of the study and marching me aggressively down the grand marble hallway. Brianna trailed behind us, her irritating laughter echoing off the high ceilings as she recorded my forced exit on her phone. Have a nice life in poverty, sis, Brianna taunted. The guards shoved the heavy mahogany front doors open. The gloomy morning fog had erupted into a torrential downpour. They threw me violently onto the wet gravel of the driveway. I stumbled, my knees scraping against the sharp stones as the icy rain instantly soaked through my expensive suit. The heavy doors slammed shut behind me, the definitive sound of a fortress being locked down. I knelt there on the gravel for exactly 3 seconds. The freezing rain plastered my hair to my face and chilled me to the bone. A normal weak person would have cried. A normal daughter would have broken down sobbing at the sheer cruelty of her own mother, orchestrating such a vicious betrayal. But I was not a normal weak daughter. I was a senior forensic financial auditor, and my mother had just made the biggest miscalculation of her miserable life. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my ruined blazer. I slowly wiped the thick mud from my knees, turned my back on the $12 million mansion, and walked with absolute purpose toward the guest house where my car was hidden. I slid into the driver's seat of my sleek black sedan, locking the doors and turning on the engine to blast the heat. I did not waste a single second mourning the family I never truly had. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out my encrypted military-grade laptop. I opened the screen, typing in a complex sequence of alphanumeric passwords to bypass the biometric security wall. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh blue glow. Brad Jenkins thought he was a mastermind because he bribed a local judge and hired a few cheap thugs. He had no idea he was dealing with someone who held federal clearance. I opened a secure terminal and accessed the dark web financial registries. I typed in the names of the shell companies Brad had foolishly registered under his mother's maiden name in Nevada. The data flooded my screen. Millions of dollars had already been siphoned from Baptiste Logistics to cover his family's massive inherited debts. I highlighted the fraudulent wire transfers, the fake real estate transactions, and the undeniable paper trail linking Brad directly to international money laundering. My fingers flew across the keyboard with lethal precision. I opened a direct encrypted communication channel to my contacts at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I attached the audio recording of my mother confessing to embezzlement and the digital footprint of Brad's stolen millions. Then I initiated a federal audit protocol. I hit the enter key, launching a devastating digital counterstrike that would freeze their assets and trigger a massive federal investigation. The upload bar hit 100%. The real war had just begun. I pulled out of the hidden driveway and merged onto the slick, rain-soaked streets of Los Angeles. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. I did not drive to my apartment. I navigated straight toward the financial district of downtown Los Angeles, where the towering glass skyscrapers pierced the heavy gray clouds. I pulled into a highly secured underground parking garage beneath a sleek, modern high-rise building. This was not a public accounting firm. This was a private fortress. I swiped my biometric access card and took the private elevator directly to the top floor. The elevator doors slid open to reveal my elite crisis management team waiting in the glass-walled war room. Marcus, a ruthless corporate attorney who specialized in dismantling hostile takeovers, was already pacing near the smartboard. Chloe, my lead cyber investigator, sat behind a bank of glowing monitors, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. They were the absolute best in the business, a highly specialized unit I had assembled over the past 5 years. They knew my family history, and they knew exactly what was at stake. I walked in, dropped my soaked briefcase onto the table, and firmly nodded. They made their move, I announced, plugging my encrypted laptop into the central mainframe. Valerie and Brad ambushed my grandfather with a forged emergency conservatorship. They bribed a local judge to declare him legally incapacitated this morning. Marcus stopped pacing, his expression turning lethal as he processed the legal implications. A bribed judge means they are desperate and sloppy, Marcus said, pulling up court dockets on his tablet. They bypassed standard corporate protocol because they needed immediate control of the liquid assets. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes locked on my laptop screen. Let us see what they are stealing today. I authorized the biometric transfer, flooding our war room monitors with the internal ledgers of Baptiste Logistics. The company had always been a fortress of fiscal responsibility under my grandfather. Now the main operating accounts looked like a bleeding artery. I initiated my specialized forensic auditing software, programming the algorithms to bypass the superficial expense reports and dig straight into the raw transaction metadata. We are not looking for simple embezzlement, I told my team. Brad is an arrogant parasite. He is using white-collar laundering techniques to hide the money. We need to isolate every single unauthorized wire transfer. The screens flashed rapidly as millions of data points were cross-referenced. A massive corporation like Baptiste Logistics moved millions of dollars daily to pay vendors, maintain shipping fleets, and manage international supply chains. Finding fraudulent transactions in that massive ocean of legitimate money was like finding a needle in a hurricane. But I knew exactly how greedy people operated. They always created a pattern. I filtered the financial data to isolate outbound wire transfers exceeding $50,000 that had bypassed the standard two-step executive verification process over the last 3 months. The system immediately flagged 40 anomalies. Look at this routing protocol, Chloe said, pointing to a cascading list of red alerts on her monitor. The money is not going to offshore accounts yet. It is being funneled through regional banking branches into domestic corporate entities. I leaned over her shoulder, my eyes scanning the destination accounts. Every single flagged transaction was sent to a different limited liability company. They were all registered in the exact same jurisdiction. Nevada. Nevada has some of the strictest corporate secrecy laws in the country. It is the perfect place to hide the true ownership of a fake corporate shell entirely. I opened a new terminal and bypassed the standard registry blocks, utilizing a federal database backdoor I maintained for high-level audits. I ran the tax identification numbers for the Nevada entities. They were all registered as commercial real estate holding companies. Brad is faking real estate acquisitions, I explained to Marcus. He is authorizing massive payments from the family logistics company, classifying them as investments in warehouse properties across Nevada. But there are no actual warehouses. It is a complete ghost network designed to scrub the stolen money clean before it reaches its final intended destination in his pockets. Marcus typed rapidly on his tablet, pulling up property deeds and cross-referencing the Nevada addresses listed on the wire transfers. These addresses are empty dirt lots and abandoned strip malls, Marcus confirmed, shaking his head in absolute disgust. He is invoicing Baptiste Logistics for multi-million-dollar property developments that simply do not exist. Your mother signed off on these expense reports as the acting vice president. She deliberately authorized the bleeding of her own family company. I felt a cold surge of pure focus. Valerie was blinded by her desire for high society status, making her totally complicit. We need the final destination, I commanded, my voice echoing in the war room. Chloe traced the outbound transfers from those Nevada shell companies. Find out exactly where the laundered cash is landing. Chloe executed a rapid packet trace, breaking through the Nevada privacy shields. The money pooled into a central holding account, then immediately dispersed to pay off massive high-interest commercial loans. I pulled the creditor information. The loans belonged to the Jenkins family estate. Brad was not just stealing, he was systematically draining my family empire to rescue his bankrupt old money relatives from total financial ruin. Brad is liquidating the life work of my family to pay off generations of Jenkins family debt, I stated, staring at the undeniable proof of his monumental crime. He is using my mother and sister as human shields. Marcus printed the massive dossier of compiled evidence, dropping the heavy binder onto the glass table. We have the paper trail, Marcus said, looking directly at me. What is our next move? I picked up the dossier, feeling the immense weight of the evidence. We wait, I said coldly. We let them think they won. Then we utterly destroy them on stage. My mother was a creature of absolute vanity and ruthless self-preservation. She did not need to see the digital traces of my audit to know I was coming for her. The moment she threw me out into the rain, her paranoid instincts must have kicked into overdrive. Valerie knew that a forensic auditor operating in the shadows was a fatal threat to her stolen empire. Instead of waiting for my next move, she decided to burn my reputation to the ground before I could even speak. By the time I woke up the next morning and poured my first cup of black coffee, my phone was buzzing relentlessly. Chloe had set up advanced digital monitoring alerts for any mention of my name across all major networks. The alerts were multiplying by the second. I opened the monitoring dashboard and watched my mother execute her preemptive strike. She had taken to Instagram and Facebook, utilizing the massive following she had purchased and curated over the years to project her flawless matriarch persona. The video was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. Valerie sat in the formal living room of the Baldwin Hills estate, bathed in soft, flattering natural light. She wore a modest pale beige cashmere sweater, deliberately chosen to make her look maternal, vulnerable, and exhausted. Her makeup was expertly applied to simulate the appearance of someone who had been crying all night. My heart is completely broken today, Valerie said to the camera, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical precision. As many of you know, family is everything to me. We have always prided ourselves on unity and building Black wealth. But today, I have to share a private tragedy. My eldest daughter, Aaliyah, has been struggling with severe mental health issues for years. She has been estranged by choice, refusing our help, rejecting our love, and isolating herself from the family that raised her. She dabbed at a fake tear with a silk tissue. Valerie stared directly into the lens, projecting deep sorrow. Yesterday, Aaliyah showed up at our family home uninvited. She was erratic, aggressive, and clearly unwell. Instead of accepting the medical help we offered, she demanded money. She is now trying to extort our family, threatening to spread horrible lies about our business and her brilliant son-in-law, Brad, if we do not pay her off. We are praying for her recovery, but we will not be blackmailed. Please respect our privacy during this incredibly difficult time. The video went viral within an hour. But Valerie was only the first wave of the assault. Brianna launched the second wave. My sister had over 2 million followers, an audience she had built by flaunting the wealth she was actively stealing from our grandfather. Brianna reposted our mother's video, adding her own vicious commentary. She tagged my corporate accounting firm, my biggest clients, and every major financial institution in Los Angeles. It is so painful to watch my sister spiral into delusion, Brianna typed in her caption. Please be careful doing business with Aaliyah Baptiste. She is mentally unstable, prone to fabricating financial documents, and is currently under investigation for attempting to extort our family company. Trusting her with your corporate audits is a massive liability. The impact was immediate and destructive. Before noon, my secure business line rang. It was the chief financial officer of a major tech firm, one of my largest and most lucrative auditing contracts. He sounded incredibly uncomfortable, but resolute. Aaliyah, we are seeing the social media storm, the CFO said, his tone dripping with corporate liability management. We are suspending your contract effective immediately, pending an internal review. By 3 o'clock, two more major corporate clients had called to cancel their ongoing forensic investigations. Brianna and Valerie were systematically starving me of my professional credibility and my financial lifelines, hoping to force me into submission. Marcus paced across the war room, his phone glued to his ear as he fielded calls from my panicked secondary clients. "We need to issue a cease and desist immediately," Marcus growled, slamming a legal pad onto the glass table. "They are destroying your professional reputation in real time, Aaliyah. We have to hit back publicly before they cost you your entire client roster." I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, watching the social media metrics climb on Chloe's monitors. My expression remained absolutely blank. "Do nothing," I commanded, my voice devoid of any panic or anger. Marcus stopped pacing, staring at me as if I had lost my mind. "Do nothing," he repeated in disbelief. "Aaliyah, they are financially bleeding you out." I took a slow sip of my coffee, my eyes locked on the digital image of my mother's fake tears. "It is simply bait, Marcus. It is a desperate, sloppy distraction. Valerie wants me to waste my time fighting a public relations war on Instagram. She wants me to panic hire defamation lawyers and defend my sanity in the court of public opinion. If I engage in a social media shouting match, I validate their narrative that this is just a petty, emotional family feud. I am not an influencer. I am exactly a forensic auditor. We do not fight our battles in the comment section. We fight them in federal court." I looked directly at Chloe. "Shut down the monitors. I do not care what they post on social media. They can have my corporate clients for now. Redirect all computing power to the Nevada shell companies. I need the final layers of encrypted routing numbers for Brad Jenkins' offshore accounts." Chloe nodded, bringing the financial data matrices back to the primary screens. "Marcus," I said, shifting my gaze to my attorney, "stop answering client calls. I need you to draft the federal affidavits. We are sending an elite strike force of federal agents." The smear campaign was nothing but background noise. I was entirely focused on securing the federal warrants that would lock my mother in a concrete cell. Chloe and Marcus stared at the data streams, waiting for decryption keys. My burner phone vibrated against the glass table. I tapped the screen, keeping my voice flat. "Speak," I commanded. A trembling voice echoed through the speaker. "Aaliyah, you do not know me, but I know what you need. My name is Jessica. I am the executive assistant to Brad Jenkins." Marcus stopped typing, locking eyes with me. "Why call a secure line, Jessica?" I asked. "Because I am done," she whispered, her voice tightening. "Brad treats me like garbage. He makes me work 80-hour weeks and denies my overtime pay. He thinks I am completely invisible. He thinks I do not see the private accounts he forces me to reconcile. He is a monster, Aaliyah. I know he is stealing your family empire." "What do you have?" I asked. "I have the Cayman Island banking ledgers," Jessica replied, breathing heavily. "I have the master passwords downloaded onto an encrypted flash drive. I need to give it to you before he realizes it is missing." I gave her an address for a dark subterranean parking garage. It was a concrete cavern, devoid of cellular service. I parked my sedan in the deepest corner and waited in silence. A rusted sedan sputtered down the concrete ramp, parking 2 spaces away. A young woman stepped out, clutching a cheap trench coat tightly. She looked exhausted, her eyes darting nervously toward the exit ramp. I stepped out, my heels clicking softly against the damp concrete. "You are taking a massive risk, Jessica," I said, keeping my distance. "Corporate espionage carries heavy penalties." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Brad Jenkins is committing corporate espionage," she said, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. "He sits in that office laughing at your grandfather. He laughs at your sister. He calls Brianna his little clueless ATM. I spent 2 years covering up his affairs and managing his fake real estate portfolios. Yesterday he told me he was freezing my salary. I am losing my apartment next week, Aaliyah. I have nothing left to lose." She held out the silver flash drive. My hand shot forward, snatching the device. You have done the right thing, I assured her. Go home, pack a bag, and leave the city for a few days. When federal agents raid headquarters, you do not want to be at that desk. She nodded frantically, tears spilling down her pale cheeks. She turned running back to her rusted car. I watched her taillights fade into the darkness before turning back to my own vehicle. I walked back into the war room and tossed the silver flash drive onto the glass table. Chloe caught it and plugged it into a quarantine terminal. She ran a rapid decryption protocol. The passwords Jessica provided bypassed the offshore security walls in seconds. The Cayman Island banking ledgers materialized on the main monitor. Marcus leaned in, scanning the rows of multi-million-dollar deposits. We have him, Marcus declared, a predatory smile forming. This is the smoking gun. He routed $50 million from Baptiste Logistics into these accounts over 48 hours. It is textbook wire fraud. I stared at the screen, my forensic instincts screaming something was missing. Brad was too greedy to stop at corporate funds. I pushed past Chloe and took control of the keyboard. I ran a cross-reference on origin accounts for the Cayman deposits. The first 5 transfers were definitely corporate operating funds, but the final 2 transfers were entirely different. They were completely personal. I expanded the transaction metadata, my blood running, ice cold. Brad is not just robbing the company, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Look at the routing numbers on these last 2 deposits. Marcus and Chloe squinted at the screen. Chloe gasped aloud. Those are personal trust routing numbers, she said, her fingers flying across her keyboard to verify the data. I pulled up the matching registry. Brad had bypassed the corporate accounts and directly hacked into the personal trust funds belonging to Valerie and Brianna. He was actively draining their personal savings, their emergency funds, and their private investment portfolios. He was liquidating every single asset my mother and sister owned. Marcus pointed to the screen. Look at the outbound transaction queue. He has a wire scheduled for tomorrow morning. He is moving the entire Cayman balance to an untraceable account in Switzerland. And look at this flight itinerary Jessica included. I clicked on the PDF attachment. It was a one-way first-class ticket to Geneva, Switzerland, booked under Brad's name. The departure time was set for tomorrow night. There was no ticket for Brianna. There was no ticket for Valerie. Brad was definitely not planning a simple hostile family takeover. He was secretly planning an absolute financial massacre. He intended to steal the corporate fortune, empty his wife and mother-in-law out of every dime they possessed, and flee the country, leaving them to face the furious federal investigators alone. Valerie and Brianna were dancing around their Baldwin Hills mansion, posting smear campaigns on social media, completely oblivious to the fact that the man they championed was about to leave them destitute, bankrupt, and facing decades in federal prison. They handed him the keys, and he was using them to burn the castle down. I held the absolute power to stop these personal transfers. I could freeze the accounts right now and save my mother and sister from total financial ruin. But as I stared at the digital proof of their impending destruction, the memory of my mother throwing me into the freezing rain flashed through my mind. I remembered Brianna laughing at my pain. I stepped back from the keyboard, my face a mask of pure ice. I looked at Marcus and Chloe. Let all the personal transfers clear, I commanded. Let him drain all their accounts down to absolute zero. The morning sun bathed the manicured lawns of the Oak Ridge Country Club in a warm golden glow. Valerie Baptiste had rented the exclusive Magnolia Terrace for her monthly high society charity brunch. The terrace was a sea of pastel dresses, oversized sun hats, and sparkling mimosas. 50 of the most influential and wealthy women in Los Angeles gathered around tables adorned with imported white orchids. My mother sat at the head of the central table, holding court like a queen. She was undoubtedly spinning tales about her fabulous son-in-law and her tragic estranged daughter. I stepped out of my sedan wearing a tailored scarlet blazer that demanded absolute attention. The valet took my keys without question, assuming I belonged among the elite. I walked through the grand lobby, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpets, and headed straight for the terrace doors. I did not bother checking in with the hostess. I pushed the heavy glass doors open, stepping out into the sunlight. The gentle hum of classical music and polite laughter filled the air. I paused at the edge of the terrace, surveying the sea of wealthy socialites. It took exactly 10 seconds for someone to notice me. A woman in a floral dress gasped, tapping the arm of her companion. The ripple effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Crystal glasses clinked softly as they were lowered to the tables. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto me, recognizing the woman from the viral smear campaign video my mother had posted just yesterday. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression an impenetrable mask of total confidence. Valerie noticed the sudden silence. She turned her head, her polite smile freezing instantly when she saw me standing there. The color drained from her perfectly made-up face. For a fraction of a second, raw panic flashed in her eyes. But my mother was a seasoned performer. She quickly masked her terror with a look of profound theatrical sorrow. She stood up, smoothing the skirt of her designer dress, and walked toward me. The entire terrace watched in breathless anticipation. Aaliyah, my mother, said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincingly heartbroken. "What are you doing here? I asked you to respect our privacy while you get the mental health treatment you so desperately need." Several women at the nearby tables murmured in sympathy, nodding at my mother's remarkable bravery. She was playing the tragic matriarch flawlessly. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a harsh, venomous whisper, meant only for my ears. "Get out of here right now, you ungrateful little witch. I am going to call security and have you dragged out in front of everyone. You are ruining my brunch." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply smiled a cold, predatory smile that made her flinch. "I am not here for the eggs Benedict, Valerie," I said, my voice carrying a deceptive lightness. "I just wanted to drop by and congratulate you on your latest real estate investments in Nevada." The mention of Nevada made her breath hitch. Her eyes darted nervously toward the women at her table. I took a step forward, raising my voice just a fraction, ensuring the socialites sitting closest to us could hear every single word. "I must say I am incredibly impressed by your aggressive financial strategies," I continued smoothly. "Purchasing 5 commercial warehouse properties in a single week is quite the feat. Although it is rather fascinating that those multi-million-dollar properties do not actually exist." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the terrace. The women nearest to us leaned in slightly, their eyes wide with sudden, insatiable curiosity. Valerie grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my scarlet blazer. "Stop talking right now," she hissed, her voice shaking with genuine terror. "Security!" she shouted, looking toward the clubhouse doors. "Someone call the guards. She is having a psychotic episode." 2 club security guards immediately stepped out onto the terrace, moving quickly toward us, but I did not panic. I simply brushed her hand off my arm with absolute disgust. "You can call every guard in this country club, Mother," I said, projecting my voice so it echoed across the silent terrace. "But they cannot protect you from a federal tax audit. Did you really think transferring $40 million of corporate operating funds into fake shell companies would go unnoticed? Did you really believe the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division would just ignore massive wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands?" The gasps from the audience were audible now. The words, federal tax audit and offshore accounts, were the ultimate taboo in high society. These women knew exactly what those terms meant. They meant asset freezes, federal raids, and prison sentences. The security guards hesitated, slowing their pace, unsure if they should intervene in a high-stakes corporate crime confrontation. Valerie looked around wildly, seeing the sheer horror and judgment spreading across the faces of her elite friends. She tried to laugh, a brittle, hysterical sound. "Do not listen to her," Valerie pleaded to the crowd. "She is delusional. She is making all of this up because we cut off her allowance. She is just a bitter, jealous child trying to extort us." "Extort you?" I echoed, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Valerie, I am a senior forensic financial auditor. I literally handed the routing numbers to the federal agents this morning. Your brilliant son-in-law, Brad Jenkins, used your digital signature to authorize every fraudulent transaction. He set you up to take the fall for $50 million in corporate wire fraud. You face 20 years in federal prison. Enjoy the mimosas, Mother, I said coldly. It might be your last luxury meal for the next 2 decades. I turned my back on the silent, stunned terrace and walked away. My heels clicked rhythmically against the stone tiles, a steady drumbeat of absolute victory. I left the country club behind without a single backward glance, the collective shock of the Los Angeles elite still hanging heavy in the warm morning air. The valet brought my sedan around, immediately opening the door with a newfound deference. I slid into the leather seat, tipping him generously, before accelerating down the winding, palm-lined driveway. The adrenaline from the confrontation with my mother was slowly subsiding, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp focus. I navigated the freeway traffic with practiced precision, heading straight toward the towering federal building downtown. It was time to deliver the final strike. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division operated out of a highly secured, nondescript concrete fortress. I parked in the subterranean garage, flashing my specialized federal credentials to the armed guards at the primary checkpoint. Because I handled major corporate forensic audits, I maintained priority clearance status. I took the private elevator to the 7th floor, bypassing the standard visitor screening areas. When the heavy steel doors slid open, Marcus was already waiting for me in the austere lobby. He held a thick sealed briefcase containing every printed financial record, offshore routing number, and wire transfer receipt we had gathered. Special Agent Vance was the lead investigator assigned to high-net-worth fraud cases in Southern California. He was a pragmatic, no-nonsense veteran who despised corporate criminals masquerading as untouchable elites. Marcus and I entered his dimly lit office, placing the heavy briefcase directly onto his cluttered metal desk. I did not waste time with pleasantries or formal introductions. I reached into my scarlet blazer, pulled out the encrypted silver flash drive containing the Cayman Island banking ledgers, and set it right next to the thick leather briefcase. We have $50 million in stolen corporate operating funds today. Vance leaned forward, his sharp eyes narrowing as he looked at the drive. $50 million is an aggressive number, he said, booting up his secure desktop terminal. Who is the target? I looked him dead in the eye. Brad Jenkins, the newly appointed acting executive of Baptiste Logistics, acting in complete coordination with my mother, Valerie Baptiste. They have established a complex ghost network of commercial real estate shell companies across Nevada. They are actively using those fake entities to clean the stolen logistics money before routing it directly into private, untraceable offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands today. Marcus opened the briefcase, extracting the pristine stacks of printed evidence. He slid the forged medical conservatorship documents toward Vance. They bribed a local superior court judge to have the company founder falsely declared legally incapacitated, Marcus explained calmly. They needed total, unquestioned control over the primary corporate accounts to execute the massive wire transfers. We have the internal banking metadata, the corresponding fraudulent Nevada property deeds, and the audio recording of Valerie Baptiste confessing to the entire scheme. Vance inserted the silver flash drive into his computer, his fingers moving rapidly as he accessed the deeply encrypted financial data. The federal agents gathered around the monitor as the offshore ledgers materialized on the screen. The sheer magnitude of the theft was absolutely staggering. $50 million had been systematically drained from Baptiste Logistics and funneled into Brad Jenkins' private accounts. But that was not all. I pointed toward the final 2 scheduled outbound transactions on the screen. Brad is planning to abandon his co-conspirators. I stated, my tone chillingly flat. He just emptied my mother and sister out of their personal trust funds. He has a one-way flight booked to Geneva, Switzerland, departing tomorrow evening without them entirely. Vance stared at the undeniable digital proof of a massive flight risk. He immediately picked up his secure desk phone, dialing the federal prosecutor assigned to the Financial Crimes Unit. We have an ironclad case of corporate embezzlement, international money laundering, and elder abuse, Vance said into the receiver, his voice hard. The primary suspect is an extreme flight risk, holding a ticket for tomorrow night. I need an emergency sealed indictment and an immediate freeze on all connected corporate and personal assets. We are moving right now. Do not let any of these bank accounts process another single dime. The gears of federal justice began turning with terrifying speed. Within 2 hours, the prosecutor secured the sealed indictment from a federal judge. The total asset freeze was executed globally, quietly locking down every single dollar Valerie, Brianna, and Brad thought they possessed. They were completely broke, but they had absolutely no idea yet. Vance turned back to me, crossing his arms over his chest. They are hosting a massive charity gala tomorrow night at a luxury hotel downtown, I explained, laying out the final phase of my strategy. They plan to publicly announce Brad as the new corporate leader. That gala will be heavily flooded with wealthy investors, politicians, and media outlets. I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. Valerie wants to use the event to legitimize her stolen power. I want you to let her stand on that stage and make her speech. I want Brad to take the microphone and smile for the cameras. And then, I want you to walk through those ballroom doors and arrest them in front of every single person they are trying to impress. Let them experience the ultimate public humiliation before you lock them in a cold federal prison cell forever. Vance looked at the detailed floor plans of the downtown luxury hotel that Marcus had already pulled up on the computer screen. A dangerous, predatory smile finally broke through the federal agent's strictly professional demeanor. We will deploy 20 armed agents to secure all the ballroom exits right before the keynote speech begins. Vance agreed smoothly, standing up to formally shake my hand. Your family thought they were playing a simple game of corporate chess against a naive outcast. They have absolutely no idea they are about to be completely obliterated by a highly orchestrated federal tactical raid tomorrow night. I left the federal building with Marcus stepping out into the blinding afternoon sun. The trap was set, but the architects of my mother's destruction did not know the most crucial detail. They believed they had outsmarted a frail old man. They believed they had cornered a fading patriarch who no longer possessed the mental fortitude to defend his life work. What Valerie and Brad failed to realize was that Isaiah Baptiste did not build a $400 million empire by being naive. My grandfather was never helpless. His cognitive decline was a flawless, meticulously executed illusion. He orchestrated his own capture. The truth began 3 months ago. My grandfather noticed minor discrepancies in the quarterly logistics reports. Small amounts of money were missing from the maintenance budgets hidden beneath layers of complex bureaucratic approvals. Brad thought he was being clever, using corporate jargon to mask the bleeding accounts. But my grandfather spent 40 years analyzing balance sheets. He recognized a parasite the moment it attached itself to the host. He knew he could not confront Brad directly. Valerie was completely enchanted by her new son-in-law, and Brianna was fiercely protective of her fake billionaire husband. If my grandfather raised the alarm, they would simply accelerate their takeover. He needed an outside operative. He needed me. Since we had not spoken in 5 years, my grandfather knew a direct phone call would be flagged by Brad, who had quietly installed surveillance software on the mansion's primary network. Instead, my grandfather went old school. He hired a private courier to hand-deliver a coded message to my secure downtown office. The message contained a single alphanumeric string. It was the decryption key for a highly secured dark web communication channel we had set up when I was just a teenager learning to code. When I logged into the encrypted portal, my grandfather laid out his entire suspicion. He told me Brad was draining the accounts, and that Valerie was turning a blind eye. We spent weeks formulating the perfect trap. We knew Brad would eventually try to seize the voting shares legally. To make him overplay his hand, my grandfather had to become the perfect victim. He started intentionally forgetting names during board meetings. He misplaced his keys. He feigned confusion when reviewing simple shipping manifests. He essentially handed Brad the ammunition to secure the fraudulent medical conservatorship. The plan required absolute patience. We had to wait for Brad to commit a federal crime massive enough to trigger an automatic prison sentence. The blank email I received that morning was not a cry for help. It was the predetermined tactical signal. It meant Brad brought the forged documents inside. When I arrived at the mansion and hid behind those velvet curtains, my grandfather was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He gripped his cane with trembling hands. He lowered his gaze and spoke with a manufactured tremor in his voice. He allowed Valerie to scream at him and allowed Brad to blow cigar smoke in his face. He absorbed every ounce of their disrespect without breaking character. He knew that the only way to destroy them was to let them confess their crimes with total arrogance. He made them feel absolutely invincible, knowing I was recording every single second of their treacherous behavior from the shadows. While I was downtown securing the federal indictments with Special Agent Vance, my grandfather was still inside the Baldwin Hills estate playing his crucial role in the final act. After Brad ordered the corrupt private security guards to throw me out into the freezing rain, he assumed the war was over. He assumed the old man was completely broken and isolated. Brad was horribly mistaken. Beneath his tailored cashmere cardigan taped securely to his chest, my grandfather was wearing a highly sensitive FBI-issued covert recording wire. Special Agent Vance had authorized the surveillance device 48 hours prior. Right now, my grandfather was sitting in the grand, formal dining room, sipping a cup of herbal tea. Valerie and Brad were pacing around the marble table celebrating their supposed victory. They were drinking expensive champagne, laughing about how easily they had manipulated the legal system. Brad bragged loudly about how much he paid the corrupt local judge to sign the emergency conservatorship papers. Valerie openly mocked my unceremonious exit, boasting about how she had outsmarted both her daughter and her father in one flawless morning. They spoke freely, completely unaware that every single toxic, incriminating syllable was being transmitted directly to a federal listening post. My grandfather occasionally chimed in with a confused, weak question just to keep them talking. He asked Brad how he planned to manage the shipping fleets, prompting Brad to laugh and admit he planned to liquidate the trucks to buy more fake real estate. He asked Valerie what would happen to his personal bank accounts, prompting her to confess she had already transferred the funds to a private offshore ledger. They dug their own graves deeper with every passing minute. They handed the federal government a pristine, unbroken chain of audio evidence that no highly paid defense attorney could ever dismiss or negotiate away. My grandfather sat there holding his porcelain teacup with perfectly steady hands, secretly smiling as he recorded the exact words that would bury them forever. The bond I shared with my grandfather was the only authentic relationship I had ever known in that house. While my mother worshipped status and my sister chased fame, he taught me the true value of relentless preparation and unyielding logic. He shaped my mind into a weapon long before I ever became a forensic auditor. Now that weapon was fully aimed at the traitors attempting to dismantle our legacy. Tomorrow night at the extravagant downtown gala they were so proudly hosting, my grandfather would finally step out of the shadows. He was preparing to show them exactly what happens when you mistake strategic silence for weakness. The following evening, the sprawling grand ballroom of the magnificent luxury hotel in downtown Los Angeles was transformed into a glittering spectacle of absolute wealth. This was the highly anticipated Black Excellence Enterprise Gala, an annual high society event where the most influential, affluent, and powerful figures in the city gathered to celebrate corporate triumphs and generational legacy. The venue was breathtaking. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the sea of guests. Long tables draped in black silk were adorned with towering centerpieces of beautiful white orchids and shimmering solid gold accents. Waiters in immaculate tuxedos glided effortlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and imported caviar. The air hummed with the sound of string quartets and the low, steady murmur of elite networking. Dozens of photographers lined the velvet ropes near the main entrance, their camera flashes creating a relentless strobe light effect as the city's most prominent families arrived on the red carpet. For my mother, Valerie, this gala was not just a social event, it was her coronation. She had spent the last 48 hours orchestrating a truly flawless public relations narrative perfectly today. Tonight was the grand finale. She had leaked the news to several high-profile business journalists that Baptiste Logistics was undergoing a massive corporate restructuring. The entire ballroom was buzzing with rumors and eager anticipation. They were all waiting for Valerie to take the stage and officially announce her brilliant white-collar son-in-law, Brad Jenkins, as the brand new chief executive officer of the logistics empire. She wanted to cement her status as the ultimate matriarch of Los Angeles high society by publicly passing the torch. The flashing cameras reached a blinding crescendo, completely uninterrupted right now today. A sleek stretch limousine pulled up to the velvet ropes. The valet rushed forward to open the heavy doors. Valerie stepped out first, playing to the crowd with practiced theatrical grace. She wore a custom emerald green evening gown that swept across the red carpet, dripping in diamonds she had likely purchased using my grandfather's stolen corporate funds. She waved to the photographers, offering them her perfectly curated bright smile. Right behind her emerged Brianna, clinging tightly to Brad's arm. My sister wore a shimmering silver dress that caught every flash of light, ensuring she remained fully visible here today. She posed dramatically for the cameras, blowing kisses and flaunting the massive diamond ring Brad had bought with a maxed-out credit card. Brad walked beside them, radiating an utterly sickening level of arrogant triumph. He wore a tailored midnight blue tuxedo, adjusting his cuffs, with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had just successfully stolen a $400 million dynasty without leaving a single trace. They walked down the red carpet like conquering royalty, soaking up the admiration of the crowd, completely oblivious to the massive federal dragnet quietly closing in tightly around them today. Inside the ballroom, they were immediately swarmed by wealthy investors, board members, and prominent politicians. Valerie held court near the exclusive lounge, accepting congratulations and subtle praises for her bold leadership. Brad shook hands with rival corporate executives, playing the role of the humble but ambitious visionary, ready to modernize a legacy company. Brianna stood by the champagne tower, giggling and accepting compliments on her dress, entirely convinced that she had finally secured her place at the absolute pinnacle of the social hierarchy. They were living their ultimate fantasy. They felt completely invincible and utterly secure together tonight, here forever. They did not know that a completely different kind of arrival was happening just outside the main entrance. While they were busy drinking stolen champagne and basking in fake glory, a matte black armored vehicle pulled smoothly up to the curb directly behind the press line. The vehicle did not look like a party transport. It looked like a government convoy. The valet approached hesitantly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The heavy tinted door opened, and I stepped out onto the damp pavement. I did not wear a flowing evening gown or any sparkling jewelry at all here today. I was not there to play dress-up for the society pages. I was there to execute a hostile corporate dismantling. I wore a custom-tailored razor-sharp crimson power suit that fit with absolute lethal precision. The structured shoulders and plunging neckline projected a terrifying level of authority. My hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless style, and my makeup was stark and commanding. I did not look like an estranged daughter begging for a seat at the table. I looked like the undisputed owner of the entire building. The moment my stiletto heels hit the cold, hard, red carpet, the entire dynamic of the entrance changed. I did not wave to the cameras. I did not smile for the photographers. I walked with a slow, deliberate, predatory grace that instantly commanded total silence. The paparazzi, sensing the shift in power, turned their lenses away from the socialites and focused entirely on me. I moved past the velvet ropes without waiting for the event coordinators to check the guest list. I did not need an invitation. I was a senior forensic financial auditor, holding the federal keys to my grandfather's entire corporate empire in my two hands today. The heavy brass doors to the grand ballroom were opened by two uniformed ushers. As I stepped over the threshold, the sheer visual impact of my presence sent an immediate shockwave through the room. The people standing near the entrance parted instinctively, creating a clear path for me to walk through. The low hum of conversation began to falter as more guests turned to look at the woman in the crimson suit, radiating absolute, unwavering dominance. From across the massive ballroom, I saw the exact moment my family noticed the sudden chilling shift in the room's entire atmosphere right now. Brianna was standing near the towering champagne fountain when she finally spotted me cutting through the crowd. Her initial reaction was pure, unadulterated confusion. She blinked rapidly, gripping her crystal flute as if trying to process an optical illusion. The sister she had so viciously mocked, the woman she believed was currently sitting in a tiny apartment crying over a ruined career, was instead parting the sea of Los Angeles elite like absolute royalty. The confusion on Brianna's face quickly morphed into a profound, desperate anger. She handed her drink to a passing waiter and marched straight toward the velvet rope separating the VIP lounge from the main floor. She was determined to embarrass me today. I approached the golden stanchions, maintaining my steady, predatory pace. Brianna stepped directly into the narrow entryway, physically blocking my path completely. She crossed her arms over her chest, forcing a condescending smirk onto her perfectly contoured face. "You really have no shame, do you, Aaliyah?" Brianna said, her voice pitched loud enough to hear. Security must have been sleeping at the front doors. This is a highly exclusive charity gala for the most powerful families in the city. They do not let broke, disgraced auditors walk in off the street just because they rented a suit. You are embarrassing yourself by showing up here. Turn around and walk out before I have you publicly escorted off the premises immediately. I stopped inches away from her, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. I did not raise my voice. I did not break eye contact. I just looked at her with the clinical, detached fascination of an auditor, examining a highly flawed balance sheet right now. "Brianna," I said smoothly, my tone chillingly calm. "The only thing embarrassing about this entire gala is the sheer volume of stolen money paying for the open bar. But I understand why you are panicking right now. You are terrified because you know deep down that your entire billionaire heiress persona is a fragile house of cards waiting to collapse completely. You think standing behind a velvet rope makes you powerful. You are completely delusional." Brianna let out a loud, mocking laugh, trying to rally the attention of the onlookers nearby. "Oh, please, Aaliyah," she sneered, waving her hand dismissively in the air. "You are just bitter because Mom cut off your funding and Brad fired you from the family business forever. You have absolutely no connections here tonight. Nobody in this VIP section knows who you really are. You do not even have an invitation to this event. You are nothing but a pathetic party crasher desperately trying to steal my spotlight tonight." I tilted my head slightly, a cold smile finally touching my lips. "I do not need to steal your spotlight, Brianna," I replied softly. "I am just here to turn off the power. And as for my invitation, I think you should take a very close look at who is standing right behind me." Before Brianna could formulate another toxic insult, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair stepped out of the crowd and stopped directly at my right side. He wore an impeccably tailored black tuxedo and carried an aura of undeniable absolute authority. The murmurs in the surrounding crowd immediately shifted from curious gossip to hushed absolute respect. It was Marcus Sterling, the District Attorney of Los Angeles County. He was the keynote speaker for the evening, the guest of honor, and the single most powerful legal figure in the entire building. Brianna's condescending smirk vanished instantly. The color drained from her face completely as she recognized the man standing beside me. "District Attorney Sterling," Brianna stammered, taking a clumsy step backward. "It is an absolute honor to have you here tonight. We are so grateful you could make it to our gala." The district attorney did not offer her a warm smile. He looked at Brianna with a polite but chillingly professional distance. "Thank you for the welcome," he said, his voice carrying effortless heavy weight. "I am looking forward to the keynote address. However, I believe you are blocking the entrance for my esteemed +1. He gestured directly toward me, offering his arm. "Aaliyah and I have been discussing some highly sensitive corporate compliance initiatives this week. Her forensic insights are absolutely invaluable right now." The silence that followed was completely deafening. Brianna stood paralyzed, her mouth hanging open in sheer, unadulterated terror. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Her disgraced, broke outcast of a sister was not sneaking into the event. Her sister was attending as the personal invited guest of the highest-ranking law enforcement official in Los Angeles today. The narrative she and my mother had spent days spinning about my mental instability and financial ruin disintegrated right in front of her eyes. If I had the district attorney as a close personal ally, I was not a helpless victim. I was a massive existential threat. I placed my hand lightly on the district attorney's arm. "Thank you, Marcus," I said smoothly, offering him a brief nod before turning my gaze back to my sister. "Now, if you will excuse us, Brianna, the adults have very important business to discuss tonight. I suggest you go find your husband and your mother right away. You are going to want to spend as much time with them as possible before the evening officially ends." Brianna did not say another word. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her expensive silver heels in her desperate rush to get out of my way. She turned and sprinted across the ballroom floor, pushing past the confused waiters and guests. I watched her retreat, knowing exactly where she was going. She was running straight to Valerie and Brad to deliver the terrifying news. I stepped past the velvet ropes, entering the VIP lounge with absolute flawless dominance. The trap was fully locked, and there was no escape tonight. I moved through the VIP lounge, the crimson fabric of my suit cutting a sharp line through the sea of subdued evening wear. The conversations around me dropped to a hush, a ripple of quiet curiosity following my deliberate steps. I was not there to mingle. I positioned myself near the back of the room, choosing an alcove that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the main stage. The grand ballroom of the luxury hotel was a testament to excess, shimmering with crystal and gold, a perfect backdrop for the illusion my mother was about to sell. Marcus Sterling, the district attorney, remained near the entrance, a silent sentinel, his presence alone validating my authority. The low hum of the gala faded as the lights dimmed, signaling the start of the evening's formal program. The spotlight hit the center stage, illuminating the polished podium. The crowd settled into their seats, the clinking of crystal glasses subsiding. A hush fell over the room as my mother, Valerie Baptiste, ascended the stairs. She moved with practiced elegance, the emerald green silk of her gown trailing behind her, a vision of the devoted matriarch. She adjusted the microphone, offering a serene, perfectly calibrated smile to the audience of Los Angeles elite. "Good evening, esteemed guests, colleagues, and friends." Valerie began, her voice smooth and resonant, echoing through the cavernous ballroom. "Tonight is not just a celebration of corporate achievement, it is a celebration of family, of legacy, and of the enduring spirit of Black excellence." I watched her from the shadows, my expression impassive. The hypocrisy of her words was staggering. She spoke of family values standing on a stage paid for by stolen funds, while her own father, the architect of that wealth, was trapped in a fraudulent conservatorship. "My father, Isaiah Baptiste, built Baptiste Logistics from a single truck into a cornerstone of this city's economy." She continued, her voice taking on a carefully manufactured tremor. "He poured his soul into that company, ensuring that our family would never know the struggles he endured. He built a foundation of generational wealth, a legacy meant to be protected and nurtured." She paused, allowing the audience to absorb the emotional weight of her performance. The silence in the room was absolute, every eye fixed on the woman they believed was the steadfast guardian of the Baptiste empire. I felt a cold surge of disgust. She was using my grandfather's legacy to legitimize the very man who was dismantling it. "As many of you know, my father has recently faced health challenges," Valerie said, executing a flawless portrayal of a grieving daughter. "It has been a difficult time for our family, navigating the painful reality of his declining health. But even in his quiet moments, his vision remains clear. He always knew that for a legacy to endure, it must evolve, it must embrace new leadership, fresh perspectives, and unwavering dedication." She gestured toward the front row, her smile widening. "Which brings me to the true purpose of tonight's gathering. We are not just honoring the past, we are securing the future." When it became clear that Baptiste Logistics needed a steady hand to guide it through this transition, we looked no further than our own family. The spotlight shifted, highlighting Brad Jenkins sitting in the front row next to a beaming Brianna. He looked up, his expression a masterpiece of calculated humility. "Brad Jenkins is more than just my son-in-law," Valerie proclaimed, her voice ringing with false pride. He is a brilliant financial mind, a man of exceptional integrity, and a devoted member of this family. Over the past few months, he has proven his dedication stepping in to support us during our most vulnerable hour. He possesses the refinement, the strategic vision, and the fierce commitment required to take Baptiste Logistics into its next chapter. She extended her hand toward the stage. It is with immense pride and with my father's deepest blessing that I officially introduce the new Chief Executive Officer of Baptiste Logistics, Brad Jenkins. The ballroom erupted in applause, the elite crowd, completely unaware of the massive fraud occurring right beneath their noses, cheered enthusiastically. Investors clapped, assuming they were witnessing a seamless corporate transition. Politicians nodded approvingly at the display of family unity. Brianna stood up, clapping loudly, her face glowing with triumph as she watched her husband ascend the stage. Brad walked up the steps, adjusting his tuxedo jacket, exuding the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had just pulled off the greatest heist in corporate history. He embraced Valerie, a public display of familial affection that masked the toxic reality of their partnership. He took his place at the podium, gripping the edges, leaning into the microphone with an arrogant grin. "Thank you, Valerie," Brad said, his voice smooth and confident. "Your trust and the trust of the entire Baptiste family means the world to me. I know I have big shoes to fill. Isaiah Baptiste is a legend, a pioneer who laid the groundwork for everything we are celebrating tonight." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, his ego feeding on the applause. But as Valerie said, true legacy requires evolution. It requires modernizing operations, expanding into new markets, and maximizing the potential of our assets. I am committed to bringing a new level of sophistication to Baptiste Logistics. We will streamline our operations, optimize our financial strategies, and ensure that this company not only survives, but dominates. I listened to him speak, my jaw clenched. Optimizing financial strategies. It was a bold euphemism for laundering $50 million through fake Nevada real estate. He was standing in front of the city's most powerful figures, bragging about his vision while secretly holding a one-way ticket to Switzerland. He believed he was untouchable. He believed his white-collar refinement had shielded him from consequences. "This is not just a transition of leadership," Brad concluded, his voice rising, projecting total victory. "It is a transformation, a new era for Baptiste Logistics, an era defined by aggressive growth, unwavering excellence, and absolute success. Thank you all for being here to witness the beginning." The applause swelled again, a thunderous roar of approval. Brad raised his glass, grinning with pure, arrogant triumph. He thought he had won. He thought the empire was his. He had absolutely no idea that his entire reality was about to collapse. Brad raised his crystal glass high into the air, the golden champagne catching the brilliant light of the chandeliers. A triumphant grin stretched across his face as the elite crowd of Los Angeles cheered for their new corporate king. I did not blink. I reached into the pocket of my crimson blazer and pressed a single button on my encrypted phone. Chloe, stationed miles away in our secure war room, received the signal instantly. The execution commenced. The soaring classical music playing through the ballroom speakers abruptly cut off, replaced by a sharp, piercing frequency feedback loop that made several guests cover their ears in alarm. The massive digital screens flanking the main stage suddenly flickered and went entirely pitch black. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Brad lowered his glass, his smug smile faltering as he tapped the microphone, assuming a simple technical glitch had interrupted his perfect moment. He looked toward the wings, signaling the event coordinators to fix the issue. But they had absolutely no control over the system anymore. The screens flared back to life with blinding, undeniable clarity. Instead of a corporate logo, the massive high-definition displays now projected stark black and white financial documents. I stepped out from the shadows of the VIP alcove, walking with measured predatory precision toward the center of the room. I calmly picked up the wireless microphone left resting on an audio console. I flipped the power switch. The green indicator light flared. Testing the audio, I tapped the microphone twice. The sharp, heavy thumps echoed like gunshots through the cavernous space, commanding total silence. Everyone turned to look at me in my striking crimson suit. Brad stared down from the stage, his face draining of all color, as genuine panic finally set into his features. "Good evening, esteemed guests," I said, my voice projecting with lethal, absolute authority across the silent ballroom. "I am Aaliyah Baptiste, Senior Forensic Financial Auditor. I apologize for interrupting this beautiful celebration, but there has been a slight miscalculation regarding tonight's executive transition. You see, the man standing before you is not a visionary leader. He is a prolific, highly functioning corporate parasite." Valerie lunged forward from her seat in the front row, her face twisted in absolute horror. "Turn those screens off right now," she shrieked, gesturing wildly at the hotel staff. "She is a disgruntled, mentally unstable trespasser. Get security in here." I did not look at her. I kept my eyes locked dead on Brad. "Let us direct our attention to the main screens," I commanded, raising my free hand. The display instantly zoomed in on the first document. "This is an emergency medical conservatorship order signed yesterday morning by a corrupt local judge. Brad and my mother Valerie used this fraudulent document to declare my grandfather the true founder of this company legally incapacitated. They bypassed the board of directors and seized immediate hostile control of the corporate bank accounts. They did not do this to protect his legacy. They did it so they could execute an absolute financial massacre without requiring a second executive signature." Murmurs of shock erupted from the audience. Prominent politicians and rival CEOs stared at the screens, their experienced eyes recognizing the unmistakable markers of a hostile, illegal asset grab. Brianna stood frozen next to her mother, completely unable to process the scale of the disaster unfolding. I paced slowly across the polished floor, owning the entire room. The screens shifted seamlessly to the next piece of evidence. A list of wire transfers flooded the displays, highlighted in red ink. Once Brad gained unrestricted access, he immediately initiated 40 separate wire transfers. I explained, breaking down the complex financial crimes with clinical precision. He moved $50 million out of the Baptiste Logistics operational funds. The money was routed directly into 5 limited liability companies registered in Nevada. Brad claimed these were commercial real estate acquisitions. However, as the property deeds on the screen clearly show, these addresses belong to abandoned strip malls and empty dirt lots. It is a textbook ghost network. Brad swallowed hard, taking a desperate step backward. "This is fabricated," he yelled into his microphone, his voice cracking with panic. "She hacked the system and altered the data." I smiled coldly, a grin promising absolute ruin. "Numbers do not lie, Brad," I replied smoothly. The Nevada shell companies were a washing machine. The screens shifted again, displaying the final destination of the stolen millions. As you can clearly see, the $50 million was instantly funneled into private, untraceable offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. Accounts that are registered exclusively under the name Brad Jenkins. I finished. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Investors grabbed their phones, frantically texting their legal teams. The facade was shattered. But I was not finished. I had one final blow to deliver. "The corporate theft is impressive," I continued. "But the true tragedy of tonight is personal. Please look closely at the final 2 transactions highlighted right now." The displays zoomed in on 2 massive outbound transfers originating from personal trust routing numbers. I watched my sister and mother squint at the screens. Valerie realized it first. She gasped, grabbing her chest. Brianna let out a horrified, strangled cry. "Yes," I said, my voice devoid of any mercy. "Brad did not just steal from the company. Last night he bypassed the corporate network and hacked directly into your private trust funds. He liquidated your personal savings and investment portfolios. He drained you to absolute zero." The final image flashed on the screen behind Brad. It was a digital flight itinerary. He booked a one-way first-class ticket to Geneva, Switzerland, departing tomorrow evening, I announced, dropping the final bomb. There is no ticket for his loyal wife. There is no ticket for his devoted mother-in-law. He intended to steal the corporate fortune, empty your personal accounts, and flee the country. leaving you both destitute and facing federal prison alone. Brad looked down at the massive screens displaying the undeniable proof of his extreme cowardice glaring in bright white text. The flight itinerary to Geneva, Switzerland hung over his head like a digital guillotine. The deafening silence in the grand ballroom shattered instantly, replaced by the chaotic roar of the Los Angeles elite demanding immediate answers. Brad gripped the edges of the polished podium so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. He looked at the heavy exit doors, then at the sea of disgusted faces, realizing there was absolutely no escape. He was trapped in a fortress of his own making, surrounded by the very people he had tried to fool today. I watched his chest heave as he desperately searched for a way out. The charming, sophisticated white-collar savior routine evaporated instantly. Brad Jenkins, the scion of a bankrupt old money family, finally showed his true face to the world. He leaned into the microphone, his features twisting into an ugly, feral snarl. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my mother, who was still paralyzed in the front row. "This is your fault," he screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated rage right now at this moment. "You forced me to do this. You greedy, pathetic women pushed me into a dark corner. You dragged me into your mess." The crowd gasped loudly as Brad threw his mother-in-law completely under the bus. "You wanted the prestige," he yelled, his voice echoing violently through the grand ballroom. "You wanted the Jenkins name to validate your ghetto trucking company. You begged me to fix your broken business because you were too incompetent to run it yourself. You handed me the keys. I did what I had to do to survive this absolute circus of a family dynamic. Do not look at me like I am the criminal here tonight. You forged the legal conservatorship documents. You bribed the local judge. I just executed the plan you demanded." Brad lost all semblance of control. The polite society rules vanished entirely, replaced by venomous, racially coded hatred. He glared at the sea of wealthy black executives, investors, and politicians in the room. "You are all just playing dress-up." Brad spat, his face red with absolute fury. "You wear expensive tailored suits and rent luxury hotel ballrooms, but you are still just common trash pretending to be rich today. You have no real class. You have no real pedigree at all. I come from a legacy you could never buy. I was taking what I was owed for having to tolerate your loud, tasteless, pathetic attempts to be part of high society." Brianna stood beside the podium, her shimmering silver dress reflecting the harsh stage lights. She stared at the man she had proudly paraded in front of the cameras just an hour ago. Brad turned his vitriol directly onto her. "And you," Brad hissed, looking at my sister with absolute complete disgust, ruining her perfect night totally now. "You are the most shallow, useless creature I have ever met in my entire life. Did you really think I loved you at all? You are a walking credit card bill. You drain valuable resources and produce absolutely nothing of value. I took your trust fund because it was the only useful thing you brought to this miserable marriage." The harsh reality of his brutal words hit Brianna like a speeding freight train. The Swiss flight ticket, the emptied trust funds, the realization that she was entirely broke and publicly humiliated finally broke her fragile mind completely right now today. Her hands balled into tight fists. She let out a guttural, terrifying scream that pierced through the murmuring crowd. "You stole my money!" Brianna shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams. "You used me." She did not hesitate for a second. Brianna lunged across the stage, throwing her entire body weight at her husband. She tackled Brad with a level of ferocity I had never seen from her before today. They crashed heavily into the wooden podium, knocking the heavy microphone stand to the floor with a deafening screech of audio feedback. Brianna grabbed Brad's lapels, ripping the expensive tuxedo jacket he had bought with her stolen money. She slapped his face repeatedly, her perfectly manicured nails scratching deep red lines across his pale cheek. "You ruined my life!" she sobbed hysterically, pounding her fists into his chest. "Give me my money back right now!" Brad stumbled backward, trying to push her away, but Brianna clung to him like a rabid animal. The polished, elegant society heiress was reduced to a screaming, violent mess on the stage floor. The ballroom erupted into total pandemonium. Wealthy investors and elite socialites scrambled backward trying to distance themselves from the shocking physical altercation unfolding on the main stage. Photographers who had snuck past the velvet ropes began snapping rapid-fire photos capturing the complete destruction of the Baptiste family image. Brianna tackled Brad again, sending them both crashing into the massive flower arrangements. White orchids and shattered glass rained down on them. Waiters dropped their silver trays in shock, the sound of breaking crystal adding to the chaotic symphony of complete and total ruin sweeping across the massive room. Down in the front row, Valerie Baptiste watched her entire universe disintegrate completely. The massive empire she had deliberately stolen today, totally burned now. The social standing she had worshipped and the flawless family image she had ruthlessly protected were burning to ashes in front of the most powerful people in Los Angeles. She clutched her chest, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Her emerald green gown suddenly looked heavy and suffocating. She tried to stand up, reaching a trembling hand toward the stage, but her legs completely gave out beneath her. Valerie collapsed onto the carpeted floor, gasping frantically for air as a massive, crippling panic attack took hold. I remained standing perfectly still, watching the utter devastation unfold with cold, absolute satisfaction. The brawl on the main stage raged on, a pathetic display of greed collapsing in upon itself. The symphony of shattered crystal and furious screaming was suddenly interrupted by a sound commanding absolute attention. The heavy brass doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding, thunderous boom. The massive noise echoed across the room, cutting straight through the panicked murmurs of the Los Angeles elite. Everyone froze. The investors, photographers, and socialites turned their heads toward the entrance. Isaiah Baptiste stepped over the threshold. He was not leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He was not hunching his shoulders or shuffling his feet. He stood perfectly straight, radiating the terrifying dominance of a man who built a massive supply chain empire from the ground up. He wore a flawless, custom-tailored charcoal suit that fit his frame with absolute precision. His presence commanded the massive space instantly. The frail old man routine vanished completely, replaced by the imposing, brilliant patriarch who ruthlessly dominated the logistics industry for 4 decades. The crowd stared in utter disbelief. They had just listened to Valerie claim he was rapidly declining, a tragic victim of an aging mind. Now they saw a titan stepping into the blinding light, his eyes blazing with clarity and cold, calculated fury. He did not walk alone. Flanking my grandfather on both sides was a highly coordinated, heavily armed strike force of federal agents. Special Agent Vance led the tactical formation, his gold federal badge gleaming brightly against his dark protective vest. 24 armed agents from the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation fanned out across the grand entrance, securing the perimeter with quiet, lethal efficiency. Their heavy boots marched in perfect unison against the polished marble floors. The flashing red and blue lights from the federal cruisers parked outside reflected through the lobby glass, casting an ominous glow over the silent crowd. The brawl on the main stage halted instantly. Brianna stopped clawing at Brad, her hands dropping limply to her sides as she stared wide-eyed at the massive federal deployment. Brad remained pinned against the splintered podium, his chest heaving rapidly, his eyes darting frantically toward the armed agents blocking every single exit in the building. Down on the carpeted floor, Valerie stopped hyperventilating. She looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as she watched her father approach the stage. My grandfather walked straight down the center aisle. The wealthiest executives and politicians in the city scrambled backward, parting like the Red Sea to give him a clear, unobstructed path. He did not spare a single glance for the terrified socialites cowering behind their tables. He kept his steely gaze locked entirely on the main stage. He stepped over the shattered crystal glasses and crushed white orchids without breaking his powerful rhythmic stride. He ascended the carpeted steps to the stage, his posture projecting an unwavering absolute authority. I stepped forward to meet him at the center of the platform. The unspoken bond between us solidified in the heavy, breathless silence of the room. We had planned this exact moment for months, operating deep in the shadows, waiting patiently for the traitors to expose their own monumental greed. I offered him a brief, deeply respectful nod and handed him the wireless microphone. He took it from my hand with a steady, commanding grip. He did not look at the trembling, defeated impostors cowering on his stage. He turned his back on them completely and faced the sea of stunned guests. "Good evening," my grandfather said, his booming, resonant voice filling every corner of the massive ballroom. "I understand my daughter informed you earlier that I am currently suffering from severe cognitive decline. I assure you, my mind has never been sharper. The emergency medical conservatorship she presented to the Superior Court this morning was a complete fabrication orchestrated by a family entirely consumed by their own financial greed." A heavy collective gasp echoed through the elite crowd. My grandfather continued speaking, his tone laced with chilling disgust. "Valerie and Brianna did not just attempt a hostile corporate takeover today. They committed elder abuse. They tried to strip me of my basic human rights, my personal freedom, and my dignity simply to accelerate their illegal access to my bank accounts. They willingly partnered with a desperate bankrupt fraud to dismantle the legacy I built to uplift this community. Therefore, effective immediately, I am publicly and legally disowning Valerie and Brianna. They are stripped of the Baptiste name forever. They are permanently removed from every family trust, every corporate will, and every executive board. They mean nothing to me anymore." My grandfather gestured toward me, his stern expression softening with immense, undeniable pride. "Every single word my granddaughter Aaliyah has spoken tonight is the absolute, irrefutable truth," he declared powerfully. "She is a master forensic financial auditor, and she is the only person in this family who remained fiercely loyal to our core values. She tracked the stolen $50 million. She secured the federal arrest warrants. She exposed the dangerous ghosts hiding in our ledgers." The crowd stared at me with profound, newfound respect. The false narrative of the bitter, estranged dropout was completely dead. My grandfather finally turned around to face Brad, who was currently trembling violently against the ruined floral arrangements. "And as for you, Mr. Jenkins," my grandfather said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, icy whisper, "you thought you could walk into my house and play the white-collar savior? You called my life work a ghetto trucking company. You thought your stolen pedigree made you smarter than a black man who built a legendary empire from the pavement up. You are a thief, a coward, and a parasite. You tried to burn my castle down to the ground, but you completely forgot who laid the bricks." My grandfather stepped back from the podium, his posture projecting the absolute certainty of an undisputed king who had just reclaimed his throne. He gave a brief, sharp nod to the armed officers standing at the edge of the stage. Special Agent Vance did not hesitate. He raised his hand, signaling the strike force to move in. The federal agents swarmed the platform with terrifying, synchronized speed. Their heavy boots thundered against the polished wood, creating a deafening rhythm of impending justice. Brad Jenkins tried to scramble backward, his expensive tuxedo ruined, but there was nowhere left to run. Two massive agents grabbed his arms, spinning him around and slamming him face first onto the shattered remains of the floral arrangements. The unmistakable sharp click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the microphone that still lay on the stage floor. Brad whined, a pathetic, broken sound escaping his throat as the agents forced him to his knees. Special Agent Vance stepped forward, holding a thick stack of federal warrants. "Bradley Jenkins, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, international money laundering, and severe elder abuse." Vance announced, his voice carrying the full, crushing weight of the United States government. "You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you use it because you have already confessed to enough felonies to guarantee you will not see the outside of a prison cell until you are a very old man." Brad sobbed openly. The arrogant, white-collar predator reduced to a trembling, humiliated mess in front of the entire Los Angeles elite. Valerie Baptiste tried to crawl away. My mother, The woman who had spent decades meticulously crafting an image of untouchable perfection was scrambling across the carpet on her hands and knees. She looked like a cornered animal, her emerald green designer gown tearing as it caught on the splintered wood of the podium. Two female federal agents intercepted her, hauling her forcefully to her feet. Valerie thrashed wildly, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face, her diamond earrings catching the harsh glare of the flashing cameras. "Take your hands off me," Valerie shrieked, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "You cannot do this. Do you have any idea who I am? I am a prominent member of this community. I host charity galas for the mayor. You are making a massive mistake." The agents ignored her frantic, delusional screaming. They twisted her arms behind her back with practiced, clinical efficiency. The cold steel cuffs snapped shut around her wrists, binding her hands tightly over the silk of her expensive dress. The physical reality of the metal restraints finally shattered her absolute delusion. The grand matriarch of the Baldwin Hills elite began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved violently, her eyes darting around the room in sheer terror as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. Brianna stood frozen near the edge of the stage, her silver dress stained with spilled champagne and dirt. When she saw her mother placed in handcuffs, the last shred of her sanity evaporated. "Mom, do something!" Brianna screamed, stomping her foot like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum. "Tell them to stop. Fix this right now. Call your lawyers. Tell them Brad forced us." "Mom, say something." But Valerie could not say anything at all. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably, her knees buckling beneath her as the agents practically had to drag her forward. Brianna tried to lunge toward the agents, but a tall officer immediately blocked her path, placing a stern hand on her chest. "Step back, miss," the officer warned coldly. "Unless you want to join them in the transport vehicle." The true nightmare for my mother and sister was not just the impending prison sentences, it was the audience. The grand ballroom was packed with the wealthiest, most influential Black executives, politicians, and socialites in California. These were the people Valerie had spent her entire life trying to impress. These were the people she wanted to rule. Now every single one of them had their smartphones raised high in the air. The blinding flashes of hundreds of phone cameras illuminated the ballroom, capturing every agonizing second of their total destruction. The elite crowd was live streaming the absolute downfall of the Baptiste traitors. The women who had just praised Valerie hours ago were now whispering viciously, recording her humiliated, weeping face to share in their exclusive group chats. Social death had arrived, and it was entirely merciless. The federal agents began the brutal perp walk. They marched Brad and Valerie straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, parading them directly through the sea of recording guests. It was a slow, agonizing procession of absolute ruin. Brad kept his head down, tears dripping off his face, completely shattered by the reality of his stolen life, dissolving. Valerie stumbled with every step, weeping loudly, unable to hide her handcuffed wrists from the flashing cameras. Brianna trailed behind them at a safe distance, weeping hysterically, her fake billionaire lifestyle vanishing right before her eyes. I did not move a single inch. I stood near the edge of the stage, my crimson suit immaculate, my posture radiating complete, unwavering dominance. A passing waiter, seemingly in awe of the sheer power shift that had just occurred, offered a silver tray holding a single pristine glass of vintage champagne. I picked up the crystal flute with a smooth, elegant motion. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the cold champagne, the crisp bubbles matching the electric current of victory coursing through my veins. I watched over the rim of the glass as my abusers were marched out of the heavy brass doors and pushed forcefully into the back of the waiting federal cruisers. The red and blue lights illuminated their terrified faces one last time, before the heavy doors slammed shut, sealing their fate completely. I had tracked their crimes, dismantled their empire, and orchestrated their downfall. 48 hours passed since the gala became a federal raid. Buzzing fluorescent lights and the scent of bleach replaced crystal chandeliers inside the Los Angeles federal prison. I sat alone in the windowless visitation room, The walls were thick blocks painted sterile gray. A metal table bolted to the concrete floor separated my side of the room from the prisoner area. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer, my posture straight, my hands resting calmly on the cool surface. I was not there to offer comfort. I was there to establish the final boundary. The steel door clicked as a guard unlocked the deadbolt. My mother Valerie shuffled into the stark visitation room. The sight of her was jarring. The imposing society matriarch who had commanded the ballroom 2 days ago had completely evaporated. She wore a shapeless khaki jumpsuit that hung loosely over her trembling frame. Her highlighted hair was a tangled mess. Without designer makeup, the harsh lighting exposed every line of exhaustion and terror on her face. Her wrists were bound in steel handcuffs connected to a chain wrapped around her waist. She looked small, broken, and pathetic. The guard guided her to the metal chair opposite mine and bolted her chain to the table. He stepped back, standing by the door. Valerie stared at me, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of us spoke. I looked at her with the clinical fascination of an auditor examining a closed, bankrupt account. There was no pity in my heart. The well of a daughter's love had run dry 5 years ago. Aaliyah. My mother finally whispered, her voice cracking as fresh tears spilled down her pale, unwashed cheeks. Thank God you came. I knew you would not abandon me in this horrible place. I knew you would come to save me. I did not move a single muscle. I did not offer her a reassuring smile or a comforting word. I just watched her perform. It is absolute torture in here, Valerie sobbed, leaning forward as far as the chains would allow. They treat me like an animal. You have to get me out of here right now. Call your grandfather. Tell him to drop the charges. Tell the prosecutors Brad forced me to do everything. Brad was the mastermind. I was just a terrified, manipulated wife trying to keep the family logistics empire afloat. You have to tell them I am completely innocent. I remained perfectly still, letting her frantic lies hang in the cold air. Brad did not force you to fabricate those bank transfers 5 years ago. I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Brad did not force you to frame me for embezzlement. You made those choices on your own, Valerie. You orchestrated my exile because you wanted absolute control. You partnered with Brad because his fake pedigree stroked your massive, fragile ego. You built this prison cell brick by brick, and now you are begging me to unlock the door. Valerie let out a desperate sob. She slammed her chained hands against the metal table, the steel links rattling loudly. I am your mother, she screamed, her voice echoing off the block walls. I gave you life. I carried you in my womb. I raised you in that massive estate and gave you everything you ever wanted. You owe me your loyalty. You cannot let your own flesh and blood rot in a federal penitentiary. You are a senior forensic auditor. You have the clearance. You can easily go back into the dark web servers and alter the audit trail. Change the routing numbers. Erase my digital signature from the Nevada shell companies. Pin every single fraudulent wire transfer solely on Brad. You have the power to fix this. I stared at the woman sitting across from me, absorbing the sheer audacity of her demands. She was not apologizing for destroying my life. She was not expressing remorse for trying to steal my grandfather's legacy. She was demanding that I commit a massive federal crime, risk my own freedom, and destroy my professional reputation, just to save her from the consequences of her monumental greed. She was still trying to use me. I slowly stood up from the metal chair, smoothing a microscopic crease from my charcoal blazer. I looked down at Valerie Baptiste, feeling an absolute sense of liberation wash over my entire soul. The invisible toxic chains that had bound me to this narcissistic woman were permanently shattered. You really do not understand anything at all, I said, my voice dropping to a chilling whisper. You think biology gives you a free pass to commit treason against your own blood. You think bringing me into this world entitles you to destroy my life whenever it suits your selfish agenda. I am not altering a single digit in that federal audit. I am going to testify against you in court and watch the judge hand you a maximum sentence. Valerie gasped, her eyes widening in absolute paralyzing horror. Aaliyah, please! She begged, her voice dissolving into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. You cannot do this to your family. I leaned forward, placing both of my hands flat on the cold metal table, bringing my face just inches from hers. I delivered the final, devastating truth. DNA made us relatives, I said, enunciating every word with lethal precision. But loyalty makes a family. Enjoy your new gated community. I turned my back on her. I walked toward the heavy steel door, my heels clicking with the steady drumbeat of absolute victory. She screamed my name, a feral shriek that tore through her throat. She thrashed against the metal table, her steel chains rattling as the guard rushed forward to restrain her. I did not flinch. I did not look back at her at all. I stepped out of the visitation room, leaving her desperate screams locked behind the heavy steel door forever. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly for some, but for Bradley Jenkins, they moved with the crushing speed of a bullet train. His trial was a massive media spectacle, broadcasting his extreme cowardice to the entire country. Brad walked into the federal courthouse expecting his white old money family to deploy their expensive legal teams to save him. He still believed his last name granted him absolute immunity. He was violently mistaken. The morning the trial began, the Jenkins family released a ruthless public statement to every major news outlet. To avoid drawing the furious gaze of the Internal Revenue Service onto their own questionable estate finances, his parents completely disowned him. They legally severed all ties, claiming absolute ignorance of his financial crimes. Brad was left standing at the defense table with a severely overworked public defender. The federal prosecutors brought forth expert witnesses to dissect the intricate ghost network he built in Nevada. His own defense attorney practically gave up during the cross-examination because the forensic audit trail was entirely bulletproof. When the federal prosecutors played the audio recording of him admitting to elder abuse and presented the Cayman Island routing numbers, Brad completely collapsed. He sobbed openly in the courtroom, begging for a plea deal that never came. When the judge struck his gavel, Brad slumped forward, the heavy steel chains clinking around his waist. The federal judge, entirely disgusted by his predatory manipulation of a vulnerable senior citizen, handed down a brutal, unyielding sentence. 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The arrogant white-collar savior was stripped of his tailored suits and forced into a bright orange jumpsuit. He would spend the next 2 decades scrubbing cafeteria trays, entirely forgotten by the high society he had tried so desperately to conquer. Brianna suffered a completely different kind of prison. When the federal agents executed the global asset freeze, my sister lost absolutely everything in the span of 30 seconds. Her credit cards were instantly declined. Her luxury leased vehicles were aggressively repossessed from the Baldwin Hills driveway in the middle of the night. The massive diamond engagement ring she had flaunted so proudly on the red carpet was confiscated by federal marshals as stolen property. Brianna desperately tried to salvage her curated life by pivoting back to her social media following. She posted tearful, highly edited videos claiming she was a naive victim of a manipulative husband. But the internet is entirely merciless. The elite socialites and influencers she had ruthlessly bullied for years united against her. They mass-reported her accounts, flooding her comment sections with the exact footage of her violently attacking Brad on the gala stage. Sponsors dropped her immediately. Brands issued public statements distancing themselves from her toxic name. Stripped of her digital empire and facing massive legal debts from her divorce proceedings, the former golden child of the Baptiste family was forced into an agonizing reality check. With no actual college degree and zero practical skills, Brianna had only one option left to survive. Today, my sister works at a discount retail cosmetics store in a dying suburban strip mall. She wears a polyester uniform and stands on her feet for 9 hours a day, sweeping floors and ringing up cheap lipsticks for minimum wage. She spends her 15-minute lunch breaks hiding in the small, dingy employee restroom, staring at her cracked phone screen. She desperately searches her own name online, hoping to find just one positive comment, But the search results yield nothing except brutal memes mocking her ruined dress from the gala. Every single day, former classmates and low-level influencers walk into that store instantly recognizing the disgraced heiress. Brianna spends her entire shift swallowing her massive pride, forced to smile and offer polite customer service to the exact same people she used to treat like absolute garbage. Valerie faced the most agonizing reckoning of all. My mother was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy wire fraud and severe elder abuse. The judge specifically noted her profound lack of remorse and her terrifying willingness to sacrifice her own father for social status. When she was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution, Valerie attempted to establish herself as the reigning matriarch of her cell block. She tried to order the other inmates around, clinging desperately to the delusion that she was still a powerful Los Angeles socialite. The general population quickly cured her of that specific delusion. Stripped of her emerald green gowns and her extensive beauty routines, Valerie became just another aging invisible number in the system. The luxury estate she once ruled was completely seized by federal authorities to cover her mounting legal fines and restitution orders. All of the designer handbags and imported sports cars were aggressively auctioned off to the highest bidder in a humiliating public spectacle. But her true punishment existed outside the prison walls. Valerie had built her entire identity on the validation of the high society elite. She worshipped her wealthy friends, believing she was an irreplaceable pillar of their exclusive community. The moment the steel handcuffs clicked around her wrists at the gala, that community systematically erased her from existence. The Oak Ridge Country Club formally revoked her membership the very next morning. The charity boards she once chaired scrubbed her name and photographs from their websites as if she had never been born. Her supposed best friends stopped answering her collect calls from the detention center immediately. They hosted their lavish brunches and extravagant charity galas without ever mentioning her name again. She became a cautionary tale, a toxic ghost they actively pretended never to have known. She spends her days staring at the concrete walls of her tiny cell, entirely consumed by the crushing realization that she traded her family, her freedom, and her daughter for a superficial social empire that abandoned her in less than 24 hours. She traded absolute everything for absolutely nothing. The chaos of the past 72 hours had finally settled into a profound, heavy silence. I sat on the expansive stone balcony of the Baldwin Hills estate, the crisp evening breeze drifting through the towering palm trees. Below us, the sprawling city of Los Angeles glittered like a vast ocean of diamonds stretching all the way to the Pacific horizon. The air smelled of night-blooming jasmine and absolute victory. My grandfather, Isaiah Baptiste, sat beside me in a plush leather chair. He looked completely rejuvenated. The burden of pretending to be a frail, broken man had been entirely lifted from his broad shoulders. He held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, his eyes fixed on the glowing city skyline. There were no private security mercenaries patrolling the grounds. There were no toxic relatives plotting in the lavish living room. The mansion was finally a fortress of absolute peace. The relentless storm we had navigated together was over, leaving behind a perfectly clear sky. On the small glass table between us rested a heavy bronze fire pit. Inside the polished metal bowl, the forged emergency medical conservatorship document was slowly turning to ash. I struck a long wooden match and dropped it directly onto the thick stack of papers my mother had so proudly brandished just days ago. The fraudulent signatures, the bribed judicial seals, and the arrogant demands of a bankrupt white-collar parasite curled and blackened under the bright orange flames. We sat in companionable silence, watching the undeniable physical proof of their monumental greed dissolve into absolute nothingness. The fire consumed the last page, sending a tiny spiral of gray smoke up into the cool night air. My grandfather let out a deep, resonant sigh, a sound carrying decades of hard-earned wisdom. He reached across the table and placed his large, weathered hand over mine. His grip was steady and incredibly strong. "You did exactly what had to be done, Aaliyah," he said, his voice rumbling with profound respect. You excised the rot before it could kill the root. I looked at the smoking ashes, feeling no regret whatsoever. They made their choices, I replied smoothly. I simply provided the natural consequences. My grandfather nodded slowly, his gaze shifting back to the glittering city below. I spent my entire life building Baptiste Logistics to ensure my family would never have to beg, he said quietly. I thought wealth would buy them character. I was wrong. Wealth only amplifies who you truly are. Valerie and Brianna were always empty inside. They used my money to build a facade, and they were willing to destroy me to keep it. He turned to face me fully, his expression shifting from reflective to entirely professional. But you, Aaliyah, you built your own armor. You walked out of this house with absolutely nothing and forged yourself into an unstoppable weapon. You do not just understand the numbers. You understand the fundamental mechanics of power. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a sleek, black leather portfolio. He set it on the glass table next to the dying embers. I opened the portfolio. Inside rested a single, flawlessly drafted legal document. It was not a temporary proxy or a conditional transfer. It was an irrevocable, immediate succession agreement. My grandfather had officially named me the new chief executive officer of Baptiste Logistics, transferring his absolute controlling voting shares directly into my name. I stared at the bold, undeniable print. The multi-million-dollar empire was no longer just a legacy I was protecting. It was a kingdom I was now commanding. I am officially retiring, my grandfather announced, a genuine, relaxed smile finally breaking across his face. The boardroom requires a predator to keep the wolves at bay. I can think of no one better equipped to terrify our competitors and multiply our assets than the forensic auditor who just dismantled a $50 million federal fraud ring before breakfast. The company is yours, Aaliyah. Lead it with the exact same ruthless integrity you showed this week. I closed the leather portfolio, the smooth texture grounding me in the massive reality of the moment. For 5 years, I had been the family outcast, the supposedly broken daughter who was deemed unworthy of the Baptiste name. I had spent countless nights studying in cramped apartments, meticulously building my career, ensuring that I would never again be vulnerable to the whims of narcissistic abusers. I realized then that true, unshakable power does not come from biological inheritance or maintaining toxic relationships for the sake of appearances. True power lies in absolute financial independence. It lies in establishing impenetrable concrete boundaries that no amount of emotional manipulation can ever breach. It requires the profound, unapologetic strength to completely cut off toxic bloodlines to protect your own peace. My mother and sister believed that family loyalty meant blind submission to their greed. They learned the hard way that loyalty is earned through respect and betrayal is paid for in total devastation. I stood up from my chair and walked to the edge of the stone balcony. I placed my hands on the cool marble railing, letting the crisp Los Angeles wind whip through my hair. The city hummed below me, a vast network of movement, industry, and endless potential. I thought about Valerie trading her tailored designer gowns for a bleak federal prison uniform. I thought about Brianna facing a harsh reality stripped of her stolen luxury. They were entirely erased from my world. I raised a glass of sparkling water, silently toasting the dark, sprawling skyline. I was no longer the banished daughter fighting for a seat at the table. I owned the table. I owned the entire building. The war was definitively over, and the shadows were completely gone. I looked out over my newly secured empire, feeling the heavy, magnificent weight of the crown settling perfectly into place. I was victorious, completely unburdened, and absolutely untouchable. The ultimate lesson from Aaliyah's journey is that true power does not come from biological inheritance or maintaining toxic relationships for the sake of appearances. It comes from absolute financial independence and the courage to establish impenetrable boundaries. We are often conditioned to believe that blood is thicker than water, but DNA, only makes us relatives. Mutual respect, genuine loyalty, and unwavering support are what truly make a family. When the people who should protect you choose to exploit you instead, the most powerful response is walking away to build your own untouchable empire. Protect your peace at all costs. Share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your peace and build your own empire.